Okay, today we're going to be talking about two special types of lines. These lines don't have a slope, which most of our lines do. We've spent a lot of time talking about the slope of lines, and we will still continue to focus on that. But I want to talk about these two special types separately and put these into your notes separately because they do exist as well, and we'll see these come up every so often. So they are horizontal and vertical lines. So please title your notes. And remember, because this is a video, you can pause it at any time to take notes, go back and review anything. So we're going to look at horizontal and vertical lines. I'm going to look at horizontal lines over here on this side, and we'll talk about their graphs, their equations, and later on their slope. Okay, and then we'll do vertical lines with the same stuff on this side as well. Okay, so I've got our regular coordinate system, the x-axis and the y-axis over here. So I'm just going to show you what horizontal lines look like. This is probably the easiest to start with. So this is an example of a horizontal line. And again, please allow me some grace for my drawing if the lines aren't perfectly straight, but I do have lines to follow, so hopefully it'll be better than before. Another horizontal line could be this line here. Okay, they can also be here. So these are just some examples. There are an infinite amount of horizontal lines, but those are all horizontal lines. Now, when we look at the equation of a horizontal line, okay, it is always going to be, just like when we write an equation in slope-intercept form, it starts with y equals. Equations of horizontal lines will also start with y equals. So for example, this first line that I drew here, all the y coordinates, if I just look at a few y coordinates on this, so probably the most obvious is this one right here. So that is the point 0, 4. Okay. And I can pick any point on this line. So this point right here, that would be the point 4, 4. Okay. This point here would be the point 3, 4. Okay. I could pick a point over here. This point on that line is negative 1, 4. Hopefully what you're noticing, so this would be negative 3, 4, is that all the y coordinates on that line that I'm talking about right now are 4. Okay, so it doesn't have a slope, so I'm not going to have anything multiplied by x, but all the y coordinates are 4, so the equation of that line is y equals 4. Okay, for the same reason, this second line, if I were to pick any y coordinate here, so if I look at this one and I list the coordinates of that, that's 1, 5. Okay, at any point on this line, the x coordinate will change, but the y coordinate on this other line is always going to be 5. So this one has an equation of y equals 5. Okay, so that was the second line I drew. All right, the third line that I drew is this line right here. All the y coordinates on it are negative 2. Okay, there's 0, negative 2. There's negative 1, negative 2. This would be negative 4, negative 2. So the equation of this line is y always equals negative 2. Okay, so that was my third line. If I wanted to draw the line, maybe they gave me the directions, I need to draw the line y equals negative 4. Okay, I would know that's horizontal because there's no x in there. Notice there's only a y. Most of our equations would have a y and an x later on. When there's no x in it, that tells me that it should be a horizontal line and all the y coordinates are negative 4. So even if I just started plotting some points, I could plot any point where the y coordinate's negative 4. So here's negative 4, so I could plot this point. That's 2, negative 4. This is 3, negative 4. I could plot 1, negative 4, 0, negative 4, negative 1, negative 4. Hopefully you see what's happening is this line is forming. Okay, so that's the line y equals negative 4. And obviously there could be anywhere on your graph. Okay, so that's horizontal lines. This is the graph and the equations. We're going to talk about slope in a little bit, but I want to move over to talking about vertical lines and how they are different from horizontal lines. So there are a lot of similarities. The biggest thing is what they look like. Obviously, if horizontal lines look like this, vertical lines are going to look something like this. So this is going to be my line. I'm going to call that number 1 because I drew that first. Here's another example. Okay, there's my line number 2. Okay, and then I'll do a third one over here. Oops, broke my pencil. So go ahead and draw those examples into your notes. And then we'll work on writing the equation for these vertical lines. Okay, so here's what it helps, and you're going to have to kind of remember the difference here on, so if all the equations of horizontal lines were y equals, all the equations of vertical lines are going to be an x equals, because the x coordinate will always stay the same. I'll show you that with my first line that I drew, okay? So if I pick a point anywhere on this line, and I'm going to pick a few points. So I'll do that point, I'll do this point, and I'll do a point right here, okay? Maybe this one as well. All right, so I'm going to start here. If I were to ask what are the coordinates of that point, okay, hopefully you guys would say that that is -4, 1, okay? And if I asked you the coordinates of this point, if you went and looked, you'd go -4, 3. Okay, and this point here is -4, 0, and then this point down here is -4, -1. All right, so when I look at that, all the x coordinates are the same. Okay, so I know it's going to tell me for the equation of this line, it's going to be x equals, and then whatever that x coordinate is, it stayed the same, x equals -4. So that's my first equation. Okay, the second equation, it's a vertical line, so it's still going to be an x equals, okay, but now our x coordinate is different. For example, if I were to pick this point here, it'd be -1, 0. Okay, this point is -1, -1. Now I can pick a point down here, that looks like it's -1, -4. But the x coordinate on all of the points on this line are always -1. So the equation for this line would be x equals -1. All right, so x equals -1 is my equation. Notice these equations do not have a y in them. Vertical lines are going to be your only lines that do not have a y equals in them. Okay, so they're special. These are special lines. All right, so if you look at number 3, and I needed to write that equation, well, I know it's going to be an x equals because it's vertical, and it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4. All of these x coordinates, so that's 4, 0, this would be 4, 2, 4, 4, 4, 5, 4, -1 here. All of those x coordinates are +4. So the equation of that line is x equals 4. Okay, so these were the graphs of vertical lines and the equations of vertical lines. So now let's talk about slope, because we've spent so much time talking about that on when we had like any type of diagonal line that had a slope. Let's talk about how we use slope for horizontal and vertical lines. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead with the slope of the vertical lines, okay? So the slope of the vertical line, if you were to use your formula, okay, so I'm going to use the first line, and so I'm going to pick 2 points from that. I'm going to pick this point right here and this point, okay? Because remember, for slope, we do have that formula that we've practiced for over a week now. That's y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And hopefully you guys are starting to memorize that, okay? So if I said this was point number 1, and this was point 2 that I'm going to use to find my slope of a vertical line, okay? So I know I take my y2, which would be 3, and my y2 would be 0, and I subtract my y1 so my y coordinate from the first point, which would be 3. So for this line, it's going to be 0 minus 3. Okay, and I have to be careful in the order. So now again, I take my x2, which is -4, and I subtract my x1, which is -4. So I'll show that, plugging these in. Okay, so I had -4, and then I'm going to put the second one in parentheses so I remember, because that's going to help me keep track of my signs there. Let me move that up so we can see it better. So 0 minus 3 would give me -3. And -4, remember, minus a negative is really a plus, so -4 plus 4 is 0. Okay, that's a little bit strange to us, right? whenever 0 is in the denominator, because it's not possible to divide by 0, what we call that is undefined. Okay, oops. Undefined slope. All vertical lines have an undefined slope, and you can go through and calculate it and see that you'll always get 0 in the denominator. So if you just remember that eventually, all vertical lines have an undefined slope. So write that into your notes. All vertical lines have an undefined slope. Okay? So work on remembering that, because if I ever ask you on a homework question or on a test question, what is the slope of the line? And it ends up being a vertical line. So whether I give you the graph like I did up there or the equation, your job is to tell me it's undefined. Or maybe I give you 2 points and they're from the vertical line. You should be able to tell anytime you get 0 in the bottom, the denominator, it's undefined. So that's some new vocabulary for us, okay? 0 in the denominator of a fraction is called undefined. Okay, let's talk about the slope of horizontal lines. So let's jump back over to the slope of horizontal lines. Okay, so looking at this, so remember these. Okay, again, I'm going to pick, I think this was the first line. So I'm going to call this line 1. I'm going to find the slope of that line first, okay? So I'm going to use just these 2 points here. I'm going to call this point 1 on that line and this point 2. You could pick any points on there and do this in any order. I'm just picking, okay? Because I'm doing the problem. If you were doing the problem, you would pick any 2 and it should work out this way. So same formula as before. We're going to do y2, okay? So my y from point 2 is 4. Minus my y1, which from that point 1 is also 4. So 4 minus 4 on top. And then on the bottom, it should be x2. So my x from point 2 is 4. And then x1, which from x from point 1 is 3 in this case. Okay? So when I do this math, 4 minus 4 is 0. And then 4 minus 3 is 1. All right, so it is okay to get 0 in the numerator because I can take 0 objects and divide them. I just still have 0 objects. Okay, so I need to remember when 0 is in the numerator, that equals 0. Okay, so this all horizontal lines have 0, the number 0, slope. Okay, so please remember all horizontal, and it helps because there's a Z in the word horizontal, lines have 0 slope, whereas all vertical lines had an undefined slope. One other thing that is the most common mistake I see on these is when people write equations, they often confuse it with what axis it looks like. So realize when I draw a horizontal line, it looks like an x-axis, but it is not an x equals line, okay? Think about what axis it cuts through or it goes through. So all horizontal lines will go through the y-axis. And so that's why they are a y equals. It goes through the y-axis at whatever number. Like this one goes through the y-axis at -2. This one goes through the y-axis at -4. Okay, so all horizontal lines, they are not going to be an x equals. They are not going to be what they're the axis that it looks like. It's going to be the axis it goes through. Same thing with vertical lines over here. Okay, again, they look like the y-axis, but they are not y equals. Okay, it's because they go through the x-axis. So it goes through the x-axis at 4 for this line. And that's why we got all these x equals. Okay, so again, the biggest or the most common mistake I see when students learn these is that they flip-flop what letter it should be. So remember, the vertical ones are going to be an x equals, and the horizontal ones are going to be a y equals. The horizontal ones have 0 slope, and the vertical lines have an undefined slope. So hopefully make sure you get all that into your notes, and we'll be using that in class next time.